RSU 63 has a new rule involving their flag policy.
Angela Luna joins us in studio with more.
Earlier this week, the Holden Area School District had an update to when flags can be displayed in a controversial vote. I spoke with the superintendent, a student, and 2 community advocates about what this decision means to them. There are concerns involving the First Amendment rights of students after RSU 63's school board voted 7-1 to ban all flags besides the American and Maine state flags in schools across the district.
What's really in the best interest of kids? Is it banning these flags, or is it celebrating diversity and the inclusion of LGBTQ kids in their schools? That would be my question.
Gia Drew, Executive Director of Equality Maine, is concerned with the new amendment to the school's flag policy, which states that no other flags will be on display and remain on display unless it is pertinent to the current lesson for illustration. This policy change would ban rainbow flags and other national flags unless they are being used during a lesson. This announcement comes as some states have banned flags like Pride and Black Lives Matter flags across the country.
I don't think you flying the Pride flag has anything to do with hate or violence. I mean, LGBTQ people or the community, and the flag is sort of a symbol of acceptance and liberation and pride, but not really associated with genocide or with racism or slavery. So I do think there's a distinction between what a flag may symbolize and what its history may be. So I think there is a place for schools to fly all sorts of flags that are positive, that are reinforce positive things about a community.
Kat Rivera is a student at Holbrook School, says she fully supports the policy change, saying, "Personally, I believe that in a school environment, the only flag we truly need present is the American flag. Our flag represents everyone in our country as a whole, putting aside all differences." However, Michael Cabadet of ACLU Maine worries about students in the LGBTQ community losing an outlet of self-expression and acceptance in the classroom.
How is it going to make students feel? How is it going to affect their education? Are certain students now going to feel they don't belong? And is their education going to suffer as a result? Is there going to be a discriminatory impact on some students? And there very well might be. And that's the biggest harm that I think the ACLU can see.
Superintendent Jared Fulgoni, who says it's their job to implement school policies decided on by the board, saying in part, quote, "As an educator for more than 32 years with more than 25 years in school district leadership, I can say confidently that the most inclusive symbol this community has are the front doors of its schools. When a child walks through these doors, they are first and foremost a student." You can view the superintendent's full statement on our website. Back to you.